In the Texas frontier of 1875, Eleanor Parker was a widow. That's all anyone in Willow Creek needed to know. The fever took her husband, Thomas, 2 years back, leaving her with a dusty patch of land and eyes that had seen too much. She was 24, but the solitude had aged her heart. She managed the ranch alone, her hands rough with calluses, her days a repeating cycle of chores and silence. The town offered pity, which felt more like a cage than comfort. One morning, Sheriff James Miller rode up, tipping his hat with practiced respect. "Morning, Miss Eleanor. Word of Comanche movement north of here. Peaceful, they say, but keep that rifle handy." Eleanor just nodded. She always kept it handy. She didn't trust the peace, and she didn't trust the sheriff's easy reassurances. There was something about the way he never quite met her gaze, a shadow in his eyes she couldn't place. After he left, she went back to her work, the fence on the north side needing 3 new posts. It was while she was digging a post hole that afternoon that she saw him. A lone rider, approaching not from the north, but from the west, where the sun bled across the hills. She reached for her rifle, the cold metal a familiar comfort, but she didn't raise it. The rider was Comanche, tall on a painted horse, but he wasn't dressed for war. He wore a mix of traditional leather and a settler's cotton shirt, a man caught between 2 worlds. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes scanning her property, lingering on the broken fence, the small herd of cattle, the modest cabin. He wasn't just passing through. He was studying her. "I seek no trouble," he said, and his English was better than most men in town. "I am Swift Hawk." "What do you want here?" Eleanor's voice was steady, betraying none of the fear coiling in her gut. She had learned to hide her feelings well. It was a matter of survival. "I hunt," he said, gesturing to the hills. "For my son. He is 14 summers. He must learn the ways of a man." It was a simple request, a common one. But there was nothing simple about the way he was looking at her. A strange intensity in his gaze. He wasn't just looking at a widow on her land. He was looking for something else. Eleanor studied his face. His eyes held no obvious hostility, just a sharp, unnerving intelligence. "The deer are plentiful," she finally said, her mind racing. "You may pass, but you keep away from my livestock, and you keep away from my cabin." Swift Hawk nodded. "You have my word." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the ranch again. "You tend this land alone? No husband?" "My husband died," she said, the words flat and hard. "The fever." A flicker of something crossed his face. Not pity. Something else. Recognition. The white man's way is strange. To leave a woman alone. He reached into a pouch and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in leather. "Take this. Medicine plants. Make a tea. For strength." Before she could refuse, he turned his horse and rode toward the hills, melting into the landscape. Eleanor stood frozen, the bundle in her hand. Everyone in Willow Creek would have told her to raise the alarm, to shoot first and ask questions later. But she hadn't. Because in that brief exchange, she felt a connection she couldn't explain. He hadn't just seen a widow, he had seen a survivor. And what she didn't know was that the plants he'd given her weren't for strength. They were for clarity, and they would soon reveal a terrible truth. That night, Eleanor brewed a tea from the plants Swift Hawk had given her. The taste was bitter, earthy. As she drank it, a strange calm settled over her. For the first time in 2 years, the fog of grief that had clouded her mind began to lift, and with the clarity came memories. Sharp, painful, and deeply unsettling. She remembered the day Thomas fell ill. The town doctor, a nervous man who had since left Willow Creek, had been quick to diagnose fever. But she remembered Thomas's confusion, the way he clutched his stomach, the faint, sweet smell on his breath that wasn't from any fever she'd ever known. She had dismissed it then, lost in panic and grief. Now the memory returned with the force of a physical blow. Something was wrong with that day. Something had been deeply, terribly wrong. 3 days later, Swift Hawk returned. With him was a boy, his son, Running Fox. Between them, They carried a freshly dressed deer. "My son's first hunt was successful," Swift Hawk announced. "We share." Eleanor found herself inviting them to her fire pit, the unease from her newfound memories making her crave the distraction of company, even this strange company. As they cooked the meat, Running Fox, shy but observant, asked about the ranch. But Swift Hawk's questions were different. They were precise. "Your husband," he asked, staring into the flames. "He was a strong man?" "Oh, the strongest I ever knew," Eleanor said. "He was a good rancher? Knew the land well?" "Better than anyone." Swift Hawk was silent for a moment. Then he looked directly at her. "Did he have enemies?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. No one had ever asked that. The town had accepted the story of the fever without question. "What are you asking?" Eleanor said, her voice a low whisper. "The plants I gave you," Swift Hawk said, his voice equally quiet. "They are called truth root by my people. They clear the mind of sorrow, and let what is hidden be seen." He paused. "My wife did not die in the winter 4 years ago. She was killed. Her death was blamed on a wild animal. But I know the truth. I found tracks. Not animal tracks. A white man's boots. A man who wanted our land." A cold dread washed over Eleanor. She looked from Swift Hawk to Running Fox, who was watching them with an unnerving maturity in his young eyes. This wasn't a chance encounter. This wasn't about a boy's first hunt. This was a mission. "You think—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I think the same man who wanted my land may have wanted yours," Swift Hawk said. "I have been tracking him for 4 years. The trail led me here, to Willow Creek, to this very property." He looked around, at the broken fence, the lonely cabin. "Tell me about your husband's death. Everything you remember." And so, under the Texas stars, Eleanor Parker told a Comanche warrior the story she had never told anyone. The story she had barely admitted to herself. The story of a death that was not a tragedy, but a crime. Over the next month, a strange and secret alliance formed. Swift Hawk and Running Fox became regular visitors, always under the guise of hunting. But their real purpose was to investigate. They taught Eleanor to see the land not as a rancher, but as a tracker. To read the signs. A bent twig, a displaced stone, the faintest impression in the dirt. They were looking for evidence, for anything that could connect Thomas's death to the murder of Swift Hawk's wife. Eleanor, in turn, told them about the town, about the people, about Thomas Henderson, the powerful rancher whose land bordered hers, a man who had made a low offer on her property just a week after Thomas's funeral, an offer she had refused. She told him about Sheriff Miller, and the way his eyes never seemed to settle, always darting, always watching. One afternoon, Swift Hawk found something near the northern fence line, the very fence Eleanor had been repairing the day he arrived. It was a small, tarnished metal button, half buried in the dirt. It wasn't from Thomas's clothes. She had kept all of them. This was different, ornate. A kind of button worn on a fancy vest. The kind of vest Thomas Henderson wore to the Sunday service. It wasn't proof, but it was a start. A cold, hard piece of a puzzle they were slowly fitting together. Their secret investigation, however, did not go unnoticed. The gossips in Willow Creek began to whisper. The widow Parker was spending too much time with Indians. It wasn't right. It wasn't safe. One day, Swift Hawk arrived not just with his son, but with a young Comanche woman, Sparrow Song, his niece. "You need help," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The town watches you. They see a weak woman, an easy target. With another woman here, you are a household. It gives you strength in their eyes." But Eleanor knew it was more than that. Sparrow Song was not just a helper. She was a guardian, her eyes sharp, her movements quick and silent. While she taught Eleanor about native plants and weaving, she was also teaching her how to defend herself, how to use a knife, how to move without a sound. The cabin was no longer just a home. It was becoming a fortress, and they were all preparing for a war they knew was coming. The summer heat baked the Texas plains, but a different kind of heat was rising in Willow Creek. The whispers about Eleanor had turned into open hostility. One afternoon, a group of men rode up to her cabin. It was Sheriff Miller, Reverend Williams, and the store owner, Mr. Garrison. But the man leading them was Thomas Henderson, his face a mask of false concern. "Eleanor," Henderson began, his voice smooth as oil, "we're worried about you. A woman alone, consorting with savages. It's not proper." "Sparrow Song is my friend," Eleanor said, her hand resting on the cabin door, where her rifle leaned just inside. "And her uncle has my permission to hunt on this land. This is my property." Henderson's eyes narrowed. "This land should belong to someone who can manage it properly. It's a shame to see it fall into disrepair." It was a veiled threat, a reminder of the offer she had refused. "I'm managing just fine," Eleanor said, her voice like ice. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, shifting uncomfortably. "Folks are scared, Eleanor. After what happened to your husband, well, they don't want to see you come to harm." The mention of Thomas was a calculated jab, meant to remind her of her vulnerability, but it had the opposite effect. It fueled the cold fire of her suspicion. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff," she said, her eyes locked on Henderson. "But I'm safer than I've been in 2 years." The men left, their threats hanging in the air. That night, as Eleanor and Sparrow Song sat by the fire, the young woman spoke. "That man, Henderson, he watches you like a hawk watches a field mouse." "I know," Eleanor said. "He wants this land." "It is more than the land," Sparrow Song said quietly. "My uncle believes your husband found something on this property, something Henderson was willing to kill for." 2 days later, Swift Hawk arrived with a plan. It was audacious, dangerous. "Winter is coming," he said. "Your cabin is weak. I will bring men from my band to repair it. We will work in exchange for supplies." Eleanor understood immediately. It wasn't about the repairs. It was about getting more of his people onto her land, a quiet show of force. It was also an opportunity. While repairing the cabin, they could search it properly, systematically, for whatever it was Thomas might have hidden. But there was another part of the trade. "And for my son," Swift Hawk added, "you will teach him to read, to write, to understand the white man's ways, the ways of men like Henderson." He was arming his son not with a bow, but with knowledge, the kind of knowledge that could uncover a conspiracy and bring a powerful man to justice. Eleanor agreed. She was no longer just a widow seeking answers. She was a general, preparing her battlefield. As Swift Hawk rode off to gather his men, Sparrow Song came to stand beside Eleanor. "My uncle respects you," she said. "He says you have the heart of a warrior." "I'm just trying to survive," Eleanor replied. "Survival is a fight," Sparrow Song said. "And you are learning to fight well." When the town saw a half-dozen Comanche warriors working on her cabin, fear turned to outrage. But what they didn't see was the truth. They didn't see the loose floorboard the men found under Thomas's bed. They didn't see the small leather-bound journal hidden beneath it. A journal filled with Thomas's neat handwriting, detailing his discovery. He had found silver on the northern edge of the property, a rich vein running right under the fence line he shared with Thomas Henderson. The last entry was dated the day before he caught the fever. It read, "Henderson knows. He was here today. He told me to forget what I saw. He said this land and everything in it would be his, one way or another." The journal was the proof they needed, but it was also a death warrant. If Henderson knew it existed, he would stop at nothing to get it back. As the Comanche men finished their work, fortifying the cabin into a defensible position, Eleanor and Swift Hawk knew they had to change their plan. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about staying alive long enough to see it done. That evening, as they sat around the fire, Swift Hawk told her stories of his people, tales of courage and loss. He spoke of his wife, White Blossom, of her skill as a healer, of her kindness. And Eleanor, holding the journal that contained her husband's last words, finally allowed herself to grieve, not just for Thomas, but for the future that had been stolen from them both. She realized Swift Hawk was not just an ally. He was the only other person in the world who understood the depth of her loss, because he carried a wound of his own. His quest for justice was not just for his wife. It was for her, too. As his men prepared to leave, he approached her. "The cabin is strong," he said, "but Henderson will not be stopped by strong walls. He will come for you." "Then we'll be ready for him," she said. Swift Hawk shook his head. "You do not understand. Men like him do not fight with honor. They use deception. They will use the law, the army, anything they can to crush you." He paused, his gaze intense. "My people move to our winter camp soon. It is safer there. But Sparrow Song will stay, and I will not be far. When he makes his move, I will be here." He was making a promise to protect her, not just as an ally, but as something more, something neither of them was ready to name. The first snow came in December, blanketing the plains in white and isolating the ranch even further. The fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of Dr. Wilson, the old town physician. He brought grim news. There had been a skirmish at Fort Richardson between soldiers and a band of Kiowa. The army was now on high alert, rounding up any native bands they could find, peaceful or not. "General Mackenzie has ordered all Indians to report to the fort, Doctor," Wilson said, his voice grave. "It's a trap, Eleanor. They're not identifying them, they're relocating them to the reservations." Sparrow Song's face went pale. "My people will not go." The news got worse. Sheriff Miller arrived an hour later. "Henderson has volunteered to lead a civilian patrol," the sheriff said, avoiding Eleanor's eyes. "They're riding with the army. He's using the Kiowa skirmish as an excuse to hunt for your friends, Eleanor. He's telling everyone Swift Hawk's band is hostile." It was a brilliant, evil move. Henderson was using the power of the U.S. Army to eliminate his enemy. He was turning his personal vendetta into a legitimate military action. "We have to warn them," Eleanor said, the moment the sheriff was gone. She and Sparrow Song packed the wagon, hiding supplies under a false bottom. They would pretend to be delivering medicine for Dr. Wilson. It was a desperate gamble. If they were caught, they'd be branded as traitors. They found the Comanche winter camp nestled in a hidden canyon. When Eleanor explained the situation, the elders gathered in council. Swift Hawk invited her inside, an unheard of honor. She laid out the truth. "Henderson is using the army to destroy you. He wants to wipe you out so there are no witnesses to what he did to my husband and to your wife." Then she made an offer that stunned the council into silence. "Let me hide your women and children. Bring them to my ranch. The army won't search a white woman's property. While they are safe, you and your warriors can go to the fort. Not to surrender, but to negotiate. Use their own laws against them." It was a risk that could get them all killed, but it was their only chance. As they prepared to leave before dawn, hiding the women and children in the wagon, Swift Hawk pulled Eleanor aside. "If I do not return," he said, his voice low and urgent, "my son, Running Fox, is yours. Teach him. Protect him." "You will return," she whispered, her heart aching. He reached out, taking her hand. It was the first time he had ever touched her. "Eleanor Parker," he said, "you have the heart of a Comanche. When this is over, we will speak of the future." He was offering her a life beyond vengeance, a life she had thought was lost to her forever. But first, they had to survive the war that Henderson had started. The journey back was a nightmare of close calls and narrow escapes. They traveled by night, hiding from army patrols, their wagon filled with the silent, terrified women and children of Swift Hawk's band. Back at the ranch, they became a community of shadows, living in the barn and the root cellar, never making a sound. For 6 days, there was no news. Eleanor rode into town for supplies, her face a mask of calm, while her stomach churned with fear. Henderson was there, swaggering through the general store, bragging about his patrol. "We'll clear this land of savages yet," he boasted, looking right at Eleanor. He suspected something. She could feel it in his cold, predatory gaze. On the evening of the 6th day, they returned. Swift Hawk and his warriors, unharmed. They had done it. They had met with the fort commander, a man of reason who knew Swift Hawk's band was peaceful. They had secured papers, official documents from the United States government, declaring them friendly and permitting them to remain on their traditional lands. They had beaten Henderson at his own game. The relief was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. "The commander is a good man," Swift-Hawk explained as they sat in the barn, surrounded by his people. But he gave a warning. Soon, all Comanche will have to choose: the reservation, or giving up our ways to live on farms like white men. The victory was only a temporary reprieve. The world was changing, squeezing them from all sides. But the immediate threat was Henderson. He had lost his army-sanctioned excuse to destroy them, which meant he would now take matters into his own hands, and he would be more dangerous than ever. The following weeks were a strange, tense period of preparation. Swift-Hawk's people set up camp on the edge of her property, their presence a silent challenge to Henderson and the town. They began to teach Eleanor's neighbors a new way of life, blending farming with hunting, their two worlds slowly, cautiously, beginning to merge. But everyone knew it was the calm before the storm. One crisp spring morning, Swift-Hawk and Eleanor stood on her porch. They were watching Running Fox teach the younger children how to plant corn. It was a peaceful scene, a glimpse of the future they both hoped for. "My wife," Swift-Hawk said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have liked you." Before Eleanor could respond, he turned to her, his eyes filled with a future she had only dared to dream of. "When the new grass is high," he said, "we will build a new life. Not the white way, not the old Comanche way. Our way." He took her hand. "Together." She simply said, "Together." But as she looked out over the land, she saw a rider approaching. It was Dr. Wilson, and he was riding hard. The storm had finally arrived. Dr. Wilson slid from his horse, his face pale with alarm. "It's Henderson," he gasped. "He knows about the journal. He cornered Sheriff Miller in the saloon, beat the truth out of him. Miller confessed everything, that he helped Henderson poison your husband and covered it up. Henderson hadn't just murdered Thomas, he had an accomplice in the law. The entire town was built on a lie. He's gathered a posse," the doctor rushed on. "Told them Swift-Hawk's people raided his ranch and kidnapped you. He's twisting the truth, using their fear. They're riding here to wipe everyone out and get that journal. They'll be here by sunset." There was no time to run, no time to hide. The fortified cabin was now their only hope. Swift-Hawk's voice cut through the panic, sharp and clear as a captain giving orders. He sent the women and children into the root cellar, a hidden shelter connected to the cabin by a secret tunnel Thomas had dug years ago. The warriors took up positions, their faces grim. This was no longer a battle for land or justice. It was a battle for their lives. Eleanor ran into the cabin, grabbing the journal and her rifle. Her hands weren't shaking. A cold, clear purpose had settled over her. She was not the grieving widow anymore. She was the defender of her home, her people. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, they appeared. A dozen riders, led by Henderson, their faces twisted with hate. "Eleanor!" Henderson bellowed. "We're here to save you! Throw out the journal, and we'll let you live!" It was a lie. She could see the murder in his eyes. "You'll have to come and get it!" she yelled back. The first shot exploded from Henderson's rifle, splintering the wood of the porch. The siege had begun. The battle raged for hours, a terrifying symphony of gunfire and war cries under the cold light of the moon. Swift-Hawk and his men were brilliant, moving like ghosts in the darkness, their knowledge of the terrain giving them an edge. But they were outnumbered. Inside the cabin, Eleanor and Sparrow Song fired through the windows, reloading until their shoulders ached, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. One of Henderson's men managed to get close, throwing a flaming torch onto the roof. The dry timber caught instantly. "The roof is on fire!" Sparrow Song screamed. They were trapped. The cabin was becoming an inferno. "The tunnel!" Eleanor yelled. "Get to the root cellar!" But just as they turned to flee, the front door burst open. Henderson stood there, silhouetted against the flames, his face demonic. "The journal, witch!" he snarled, lunging for her. At that moment, Swift-Hawk appeared behind him, a silent specter emerging from the smoke. The two men collided in a brutal, desperate fight. But Henderson was younger, stronger. He threw Swift-Hawk to the ground and raised his pistol for the final shot. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She fired her rifle from the hip. The shot caught Henderson in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed in rage and pain, his eyes finding hers. He had lost. He knew it. And in that moment of defeat, he made his final, spiteful move. He turned his pistol not on Eleanor or Swifthawk, but on the main support beam of the burning cabin. He fired once, and the massive timber groaned, splintered, and then gave way. "Ezra!" Eleanor screamed, using his Comanche name for the first time as the ceiling began to collapse. He grabbed her, pulling her toward the tunnel entrance as the world exploded into fire and falling debris. They tumbled into the darkness of the root cellar just as the cabin imploded, burying Henderson and his treachery under a mountain of fire and ash. The remaining members of the posse, seeing their leader gone and their cause revealed as a lie, lost their nerve and fled into the night. By dawn, all that remained of Eleanor's home was a smoking ruin. But her people were safe. As they emerged from the cellar, they were met by a surprising sight. A group of townsfolk, led by Dr. Wilson and Reverend Williams, had arrived, drawn by the fire and the sound of the battle. They had heard the truth and had come to stand with her. The battle for Willow Creek was over. In the aftermath, the territorial marshals arrived. Sheriff Miller was arrested, his confession sealing his fate. The journal, saved by Eleanor, became the official record of Henderson's crimes, clearing Swifthawk's name forever. The town, shamed by its fear and prejudice, offered to help rebuild. But Eleanor and Swifthawk had a different idea. They wouldn't rebuild the old cabin. They would build something new, a new community on their land, built on respect and shared strength. 3 months later, a new house stood on the hill, larger than the old one, a home built by both Comanche and settler hands. Eleanor stood on the porch, her hand in Swifthawk's, watching their children, White and Comanche, play together in the fields below. He pulled a small, simple gold band from his pocket. He had crafted it himself. "We have seen too much death," he said, his voice soft. "It is time for a new life to begin. Eleanor Parker, will you be my wife?" Tears of joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They had faced down hatred and violence, and from the ashes of their pasts they had built a future where 2 worlds became one, a testament to the idea that even on the most unforgiving frontier, the strongest thing you can build is a bridge. If this story of courage, justice, and love against all odds inspired you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible stories we have coming your way.